all of you in the audience, first, for this opportunity to elucidate on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It is needless for me to sit here and reemphasize what my other colleagues have already mentioned, talking about the barrage of attacks on African writing, Africana studies, Black studies, which, as we know, is heralded by dubious politicians whose ambitions and divisive interests, as well as cultural warmongering, simply strive to put academia in disarray. So my take is that when we read writings from troubled spots in the world, it would help us clarify how nations move from stability to instability and vice versa. We understand Africa, having had its fair share of tumultuousness. This is just an understatement not to say they've had an overdose of it already. Okay? That such tumultuousness would provide more, or have provided more than enough for the African writer to consolidate his or her fame, okay, as one, a political, historical, social, and cultural conscience of the African continent, as well as the descendants of the African continent scattered all over the world. While this assertion might hold true to any part of the world let me say, the part of the world which has been bedfellows with unrest, the African writer, whose plight is akin to a never-ending earthquake, presents an interesting appeal, as he or she will not stop writing about the ills plaguing his or her people, nor would he stop jolting the reader's memory through a journey back in time. What we've listened here is a kind of journey back in time that the business world, the writer's world, the historian's world has presented to us. So the African writer oftentimes seemed to venture into a kind of utopia in which things were always perfect and life was paradisiac, or again, one in which life will be paradisiac. So when in my research I analyze these writings, it brings out poetic scapes, novelistic universes that point to the fact that exogenous interferences have left a once upon a time utopia in total disarray. Also, the African writer turns out to be an advocate for the reversal of the course from which Africa has strayed. And if we look at it very well, bringing it closer to home in the United States, with the current ongoings in Florida, the books that are pushed on the site is simply because these writers advocate for moving the nation or moving humanity from where they have strayed to a better place in which humanity would be one and live in peaceful and harmonious understanding. Writers in Africa and the African diaspora use their writings as voices of one, personal, community, national, continental and even global discontent and rejection of the exploitative and most often dehumanizing conditions to which they themselves have been subjected. These writers make of their writings places of political, historical, social, and cultural memories. It is not just for the Africans of today, it is for their descendants in the diaspora and generations of Africans and those of their descendants yet unborn. From these sites of memories, they expect their contemporaries and future generations to tap ideas and wisdom on the art of resisting oppression and domination. How do they resist this? They must resist it by endeavoring at all costs to right the wrongs of the oppressors and the hegemons. For the most part, we know historically are Western, they are European, they are white. This, African writers do with narratives that are consistent with what was, is, and potentially will be. The thrust of their writing has become the object of attacks. I'm not going to repeat that because a writer's role, according to Jean-Paul Sartre, the famed French philosopher, twice Nobel Prize and twice declined the Nobel Prize, okay, because of what it represents in the sphere of oppression. This is his advocacy that writers should be. But it seems as if today, doing that becomes the monster in the room that everyone must beat at all cost. Yet again, we know the news about book bannings and everything, which is simply to guarantee that we don't have memory of the shameless exploitations, of the humiliation to which part of humanity had been subjected in the past or are being subjected in the present. In a previous book I wrote, I have a copy here, I could circulate it in a minute, I titled Unsung Black Revolutionary Voices and Visions from Pre-Colony to Post-Independence and Beyond. This book explored Black revolutionaries and visionaries, okay? Spelling, in which, as an editor, I tried to spell out what awaits those kinds of visionaries. And I'm going to quote. I said, these visionaries and revolutionaries almost always end up being assassinated because they advocate revolutionary transformation of their respective communities and countries, continent, and the world at large. They understand that while political decolonization, the apparent abolition or end of slavery have their appeals and importance, of equal importance is the question of economic and social decolonization, as well as inclusivity that warrants participation from all stakeholders of their respective nations, continents, and for a perfect global well-being. End of quote. That is to say, these revolutionaries and visionaries are not content with just political and diplomatic sloganizing. They involve themselves in the mobilization and education of the masses in their respective countries and the world. They equally understand this necessity for at least two fundamental reasons. First, centuries of black extraction, enslavement, exploitation, and misrepresentation by European imperialism and imperialist interest and American capitalism as a capitalist collaboration and manipulation have simply exacerbated. So these African writers take for their task an unrelenting struggle against all internal and external stakeholders. So I see I have about 5 minutes left. I might just, there is a whole lot. Their writings strive to make, the world a biblical paradise devoid of oppression and subjugation, domination, and enslavement. Therefore, for the peoples of Africa and African descent, there is need for a worldview of liberation, not only based upon their common history of subjugation, but also on the African origin of blackness as the oppressed. This presentation, what I have strived to highlight is that African writers are advocates for the strength of his people to overcome the bane of oppression heaped upon them. This endeavor finds its genesis in the fact that even in the oral traditions of Africa, the griot has never been on the side of the oppressor. They have never been flatterers, they've never been panegyricists, they've never been hegemons. And these writers assert an African episteme, that is ways of knowing, an African ontology that Western views have consistently disparaged. One could readily bring to mind the events in the US telling us African American studies has no educational value, okay? But we know the African seems to be aware that there is a well-coordinated effort to keep blacks and the world ignorant of their own history, literature, culture, and social memory. I would certainly skip really quickly and go to my conclusion, given that I have just a few minutes. And to conclude my paper, all I just would like us to take is the fact that the black world, having had its share of oppression, has produced a good number of revolutionary and visionary writers whose voices could not, cannot, and will no longer be silenced. Only the truth hurts, and hurts so bad that it accounts for the recent waves of attacks on writings by black authors whose strive is to right the wrongs of past century, taking full circle back to the initial conversation of having a rear view mirror, or taking a flight forward like the mythical African Sankofa bird, which takes its flight in one direction, but the head is looking at its point of origin. And for African writers, it is very clear that if dismal and harmful interrelatedness is left unchecked, okay, African writers simply contend that the truth that they publish, I'm using the expression publishing of truth, borrowing from my other area of scholarly interest, which is Quakerism, because the Quakers, in their writings, proclaimed the truth and published the truth, okay? So, borrowing from that Quaker expression, they believe that it is only then that the world will be set free. And without the world heeding their writing, the world would continue to be plagued with war of enslavement and subjugation. And that will continue to be the face of humanity. I would end my presentation there, and if there are any questions, please, you are welcome. Thank you.